All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our KeyShot IDSA session today. Appreciate you all being here and shout out to IDSA for having us. My name is Kareem Merchant. I'm an industrial designer and the product content manager here at KeyShot. And today we have a great session planned for you. We'll dive into how photography concepts and skills can transform the way you approach product rendering. We have the one and only Oliver Yu with us. Oliver has quite the background and he's regularly been a part of KeyShot events, both helping us with our own teams and better understanding our customer needs, as well as creating content and webinars and talking to our customers directly. Oliver is going to spend some time talking about his own experiences and how photography has influenced the way he approaches product viz. After that, I'll hop on shortly at the end to show off a few ways you can add some photorealism to your scenes. I don't want to steal all his thunder since I'm sure he'll give you a little deeper insight into his own background. But aside from being a professional photographer, Oliver has worked with major brands such as Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft, among others. He's now Chief Creative Marketing Officer at Hyperkin, based in Southern California. And just very quickly before I turn it over to him, I did want to mention that all attendees of this session have a chance to win a free year of KeyShot Studio Pro. Our customer engagement manager, Mara Frost, will jump on at the end to close things out, and she'll announce the winner then. So with that said, I'm going to let Oliver kick things off whenever he's ready here.
All right. Thanks a bunch, Kareem. Thank you very much for joining us. I just wanted to go over some things that helped my career a lot, especially with KeyShot. As a professional photographer for 15 years, mainly in product photography, KeyShot really helped propel my career into doing many things that I never thought I would be able to with a photography background. One thing that I wanted to dispel with a lot of people, especially if you're a photographer, a lot of the times going into 3D rendering, it was one of those things that was always seen as like not being real or it's something that's not pure. Where I feel that the perspective needs to change with 3D rendering, that it's not something that is going to replace photography, but something that helps expand your knowledge and the ability and the skills of what you can do. And the things that I wanted to cover today is that it's not as daunting as you may think, that you can take the skills that you've spent years developing and it's still valuable today when using softwares like KeyShot. Um, a little background about myself. Um, as I said, I was mainly a photographer for 15 years. I've worked in the travel industry for companies like Royal Caribbean, Condé Nast. I did a bit of fashion photography, and for a lot of the times I worked in the video game industry doing product photography for accessories for big brands like IGN, Sony, Microsoft, and Turtle Beach. With that though, with product photography, the things that are very useful in 3D rendering is the knowledge of your lighting composition, your surfaces, and also being able to tell a story that's brand focused. Your instincts that you've developed over the years in retouching to create realistic renders, it's very important. That's what's many engineers or people that typically gone to school for engineering lack these kind of skills because they're more into the whole designing aspect of it, and they just don't really grasp the ideas of lighting and surfaces and being able to put that into a cohesive vision. And basically transitioning those skills into KeyShot is something that's extremely easy, as the developers here really made it so it's very instinctual in how you can use these tools and applying textures and getting the scene to look how you want it to. And in reality, it's actually something that you're going to feel that you've been unlocked to unlimited possibilities. And as I was saying before, 3D rendering, it doesn't replace photography. It actually extends your vision to be able to do things that you never thought you could before. And if you were to try to achieve some of these things, it's usually a multi-step process, requires very complicated setups, tying things up with fishing wire, whatever it may be. But you can actually do whatever you can imagine, and it's a lot easier than having to go out and buy a lot of expensive equipment, expensive camera bodies, lenses, lights. Those things add up a lot for a photographer, but a lot of these tools are directly built right into the KeyShot software that's very easy to implement. So, and how some of these things translate from photography over into the 3D rendering realm. Lighting, it's implemented through HDRIs predominantly. HDRIs are basically a file format that basically replicates environmental lighting. And in KeyShot, a very unique aspect that you can use in the software directly is that there's a HDRI editor. So if you have a baseline HDRI and you need like an extra spotlight or an extra accent light, it's very easy to make these changes to the HDRI directly in the software and actually have direct interaction with your scene. It's as simple as plugging in a light, clicking where you want that to be accented onto the 3D model, and it happens in real time and you can actually see the results. The visualization speed is amazing. Um, in terms of composition, there's many cameras. The beautiful thing about the cameras in a 3D rendering software is unlike in real life where you set up a tripod, you set up the camera, you often have to mark many places on the floor with like duct tape or some type of marker and ensure you get the exact same angle every time. But in KeyShot, it's beautiful because you can actually set up multiple cameras, even 100 if you really wanted to, for all the angles that you would need, and it remained consistent from scene to scene, from product to product, which is often the biggest struggle for product photographers because any small difference in a composition, you'll see it, especially when you're developing content for like a website or products on a sales page, where when you're scrolling through images, you'll kind of see it bouncing around a lot on the screen. In terms of materials are very easy to access in KeyShot. They have a very large library of pretty much every material that you can think of, and there's multiple textures to those materials. For example, things as simple as metal, you can have multiple metal types. They have presets for gold, nickel, steel, aluminum, and within those material types, you can actually even have striations for stainless steel, brushed metal. You can have knurled materials, and those are all very, very easy to add. And then in terms of color, the environment tied with like the HDRIs, you can change any material of the surface that it's on. You can have it wood grain, you could have it plain matte white. You can even have you could have textured walls. Whatever scene that you want, you don't have to go out and buy a bunch of tables or props or anything. Those are very easily implemented into KeyShot with just some basic structures that you can create. And what 3D unlocks is that there's really no physical limitation. You have infinite revisions. You don't have to reshoot again. Everything is saved into the files that you've put together in 3D. It's saved forever. If you wanted to return back to these environments with a different product, it's very easy to implement. You can have impossible camera angles. Unfortunately, in real life with photography, you can't violate the rules of physics. So a lens can only focus so close. Sometimes if you need a closer shot, you might need to get a whole new camera lens in order to do macro photography. But all those things are possible with the tool sets that KeyShot has given us with this software. Things like exploded views become something that's very easy to do. Like the render that I have right here of this fight stick, to implement something like this would require a lot of compositing, a lot of time in order to get each one of these shots to line up and look realistic. And to do that, it's very easy to do, and you can also create animations from this to better visualize the product for your customers. And you can also do faster concepting as while there's certain styles that you have, you can experiment with material types and designs and CMFs that are sometimes very expensive. I've gone as far as concepting a video game controller made out of pure gold, or concepting a controller that's made out of mother of pearl, which in reality it would be very, very expensive to try, but it opens up ideas and new things that a product development team can think about other ways to implement this type of style. In this case study, I actually, on the left is actually a photo that I downloaded off the internet of a iWatch. And to show that on the right is actually a KeyShot render that I created, recreated the exact same scene, exact same pose, to show that you can really make digital doubles, digital twins of what actually exists. And because of that, it's becoming a lot harder to realize what's real and what's fake. But at the same time, you can convey that message and really have infinite possibilities to what you can do. To break down this case study a little bit, you see on the left is a general model without any type of materials applied to it. It's just basically a lighting class layer where it's just the model on there, setting up kind of the lighting to kind of tell the story. And then after applying the materials, before tuning in the colors and everything that you wanted in the environment, you have all the lighting set up, and then the final render after you render and then take it through post-processing through something like Photoshop, you can really create the scene and the color and everything that you're looking for in a final render. And in terms of speed and efficiency, this is one of the main value points that I feel that I've gotten from KeyShot is that in typical photography and product photography, you have to go through many steps in order to get the final result, especially when you're freelancing or working with companies. They have to provide you and ship out product to you. Then you have to set up your scene, and then you have to actually take the photos and then spend a lot of time editing. There's been many days sometimes that I'd have to spend editing out every single dust particle, ensuring everything is looking perfect, even with like the best technique that you have out there to try to keep the product clean. There's inevitably going to be something that's just not perfect. And for product photography, those things are unacceptable. Where in KeyShot, it's as easy as someone emailing you a CAD file, an STL, and then importing it into KeyShot, setting up your lighting, rendering, and then you're done. And you can preset all these camera angles for everything that your client needs. And you can have full sets of images and assets ready for them in the exact same angle for their entire product line, be it one or two SKUs or even 100 SKUs. It's very easy to set up, and it makes it so that you have a lot faster time to do iteration, and you can review and get feedback and make changes very easily than if you need to do changes to, say, a photo shoot. You would have to reset up, re-photo shoot, re-post process. So the timeline for these products, these product photography becomes a lot shorter, and you're able to get a lot more ROI from something like that. And with KeyShot, you're no longer just capturing reality, you're creating it. You're not limited to just using real environmental scenes. There's many times, especially in the gaming industry, that I've had to create scenes that are sometimes unrealistic. Sometimes they want a controller that's floating in space, or sometimes floating in something that's completely out of reach of like a small brand. You want to put it in a luxury mansion, put a very expensive car into the render scene. All those things are very easy to do, and it's now within your possibility with using things like KeyShot. You can create more deliverables, have a faster turnaround, and provide a lot more value to kind of create the scene that your client wants. And to kind of illustrate that, I had a project that I was doing for KeyShot for May the 4th. I did some 3D renders to kind of celebrate Star Wars. Big fan of Star Wars. And for something like this, I had a photo that was taken inside a forest of basically a background that I started out with. And then I got a 3D model of BB-8, textured everything inside KeyShot, created realism by using some of the textures. Actually, the textures on that is actually of ice. Is an ice skating rink texture that's actually built into KeyShot. And creatively using these textures to kind of create realism is one of those things that you can do in KeyShot. And then you use your photography skills in Photoshop to composite it together to really make it look like it belongs inside the scene. This is just like scratching the edge of what's possible. And realistically, like you can create anything that your heart desires. And in this day and age, there's so many models online of what you can possibly use and implement into your photos or into your renders. And the big part of the value that you can also bring to companies is that you can really scale your content and iterations of what you can do. In this particular scenario, this is actually the same controller from one to the next, but you can experiment with different designs, different styles, different applications of materials. The first one that you see there is actually a LED controller from the same thing. And you can do product testing to see what resonates with your customers and your brands to really get an idea of what type of products you should bring to market. This is one of like the biggest things that I feel KeyShot allows, because normally to do something like this, you would have to create hundreds of samples in many different styles, which is often very costly. But this provides brands that are smaller the same capabilities of giants that are inside the industry and really helps level the playing field so you can really put your great ideas into something that's physical that they can see. And with that, photography taught me how to see things, but KeyShot let me create anything. This little background image was a model that I found for a TIE fighter, and I was able to recreate it inside KeyShot. And this is just an example of some of the things that you can possibly do. Thanks a bunch, and I think Kareem can walk you through some of these tools that I was talking about to really give you an idea of what's possible.
Awesome. Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, let me jump over to my screen. Let's see if I can get me up here without any issues. You seeing what I'm seeing?
Yep, you're good to
All right,
go.
perfect. And before I kind of kick things off here, it's nice seeing how Oliver was able to kind of create a bunch of iterations of the controllers and show those off, because that reminds me of a conversation we recently had with Wilson, and the gentleman who was speaking was talking about how when Super Bowl happens, you don't know who's going to actually win the Super Bowl. You have all these different iterations of NFL balls that could potentially go to market, but you have to literally make an NFL ball for every single team, and then you don't know which one's going to get posted on socials until the last second before they put it up 2 minutes later after the Super Bowl's won. So in the past they'd have to create all kinds of samples, all those samples that have to come into office really early before they actually got to the Super Bowl, and then you'd have to photograph them, and then all of a sudden you pick whichever one ended up in the Super Bowl. But with KeyShot, they were able to just create massive amounts of iterations, different views, have those prepped and ready in a very short period of time without having to actually get physical samples in that one costs a lot of money, have to come in from overseas. There's wait times and potential issues across the board. So seeing the way they use that is pretty spectacular. And right now what I have up on my scene is a little Steam Deck controller that I kind of built out, and I wanted to use this as an example to talk about a few things that Oliver actually covered, from materials to lighting. I won't dive too deep into lighting, but I did want to call attention to the HDRI editor. I'll close this for now and talk a little bit about physical lighting and so on. We have a bunch of tabs across the top that just let you control materials. They let you control the lighting environments. Right now, I have a really basic environment. Typically, when you start up KeyShot, you actually end up with this startup environment. As you can see, this is the library side where we have our environment libraries, our texture libraries, and materials that Oliver was talking about. We have tons of materials from metals to paints, vehicles, materials, crazy translucent multi-layer optics, some very fun stuff. So you can always drag and drop and create realistic products with very little effort. I'm always a proponent of taking it a step further and doing things like Oliver mentioned with the BB-8, where he's using an ice rink texture of all things to create this really or kind of an organic scratched up surface. And I'll get into that in a second here once I kind of jump into making materials. But I wanted to show you this startup environment. So you can see like this is basically what you get when you open up a KeyShot scene. This is your startup environment, and you have all these different options to work with. I tend to go with something with a little bit more contrast that helps me create more realistic materials because I can actually see, the divots and the texture really, really clearly, which is what you're seeing on my environment over here. So that's a really easy way to quickly jump through, create outdoor lighting, indoor lighting, give things context. You can always make adjustments past that, over here on the right-hand side. And in this case, this is what the lighting environment looks like when you drag and drop a lighting environment. And it's literally your panels and the total environment surrounding it. And if I zoom out far enough, you can see this little world that the product is living inside of, right? I tend to go for, especially when I'm starting things off, a cleaner, more studio shot aesthetic. And that's why I like to jump over to color and I pick a basic color. It just lets me work in a nice way. And then from there, I can always build out. I can use this as a base to composite images, to use AI for backgrounds, to add more models in the future and create context. But this is just a really great way for me to start. And I recommend everybody does that as well. Now, in context to the HDRI editor, what Oliver was talking about, this HDRI editor just lets you add lights, different shapes, and then with this magical little target arrow, I can click anywhere on my model and I can add a highlight to that specific face or that specific area to add a little bit more drama. I don't have to sit there and move lights around like I would in a physical studio. Although we do have physical lights, so you can literally recreate an actual physical studio inside of KeyShot if you wanted to. But HDR lighting is one significantly faster than running physical lights, and it's just as easy, as the physical lights inside a KeyShot. So that's just a fun little way to quickly add some drama and some contrast into your scenes to jump over to the environments tab and then start messing around with your HDRIs. And as you can see, I took a base HDRI, I literally added one light into it, click the surface, and then now we have a little bit more of that three-dimensionality to the object because I was able to highlight an edge, able to highlight the creases in this soft padded surface. So definitely jump over there. But what I wanted to talk about, and this is going back to the materials, if I double click this surface, I've basically created, this was a quick material I threw together. My idea was this kind of like textured, recycled-ish material, and that's what I came up with here. So if we go into our material graph, we can actually look at what that texture is. And basically all we got going on here is a spots texture and a noise texture. Now, to take a step back, when we're looking in our libraries, for materials, a lot of these materials, especially if you're talking about brushed metals or, in this case, it's like a herringbone wood. It's already got the herringbone texture put into it. But you can create custom textures. You can source textures online. You can take photos of textures you see, convert them to normal maps or black and white so that you can create your own textures in KeyShot. And those are all great ways to do it. The key whenever you're doing something like that is to make sure that it is seamless, because when you're shooting a product with a photo with a camera and you're zoomed in and you take a shot of this texture, it's not going to have a random grid or tiling or lines, and that can give away the photorealism inside of your scene. So having a seamless texture plays a big role in making sure that your objects look incredibly accurate. But one quick way around that, if you're just looking to kind of experiment, see what kind of CMF you can come up with, maybe try to recreate a real life texture if you're not using something from like a catalog like Simona Boltron or Moldtec, you can come in here and you can use our procedural textures. So if I right click here and I go into our textures, you can see all these different textures from woods to marbles and granites. The camouflage texture actually comes in handy because you can do all kinds of layered colors and create depth effects using that, as well as our meshes and our brushes. And the cool part about using a procedural texture is it's already seamless. You can warp it so that it doesn't look like the original texture, which I will show you here. Here's the original kind of series of nodes that built that texture I made, and I'll kind of recreate that right now. So all we have is the base texture here, and we have the paint layer, which is what you're seeing here, this like really glossy gray material that's over the top of it. And so I'm going to come in here real quick, and I'm going to grab that spots texture, and I'm going to show you the flexibility you have in procedural. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop that into a bump. If I zoom in here, you can see what I'm doing. We have all these different nodes that control roughness and opacity. When you're creating a texture, you want to use the bump. And to be clear, this is more of a kind of an illusion, a textural illusion. It's not actually creating CAD data. Although you can also do that in KeyShot. You can actually physically use a texture to manipulate the CAD, create a extruded surface or a texture in the surface. And if you wanted to prototype, whether you were using full color prints with 3MF or you wanted to just do a quick FDM print, you can output this as 3MF, as STL, and actually print your prototypes without having to, build crazy knurling inside of your CAD and have to deal with the stress of making that a reality. Because as someone who's CAD modeled knurling in the past, I think I still have anxiety from that experience. So being able to do it from KeyShot is significantly easier. But nonetheless, so here we go. We have our spots texture. What I did is I hit the C, which is a color preview. So now I'm looking at the actual image that's overlaid on top of my material rather than the material. So I like to work like this, where I'm looking at the actual material underneath it, because then I can see exactly what the texture that I'm working with looks like, and what the different parameters that I'm playing with, how they're affecting the actual texture. And as you can see, this is supposed to be a spots, but the more I play with this, the more I distort it, change density, add fall off, I'm really creating this organic kind of meteoric surface, right? And this is just an example. I'm not trying to recreate something specifically, but you can see this like really catastrophic change to the surface once I go back to the actual material rather than the image texture. I just usually jump back and forth between them. I can adjust my bump heights so they're not quite as drastic, and it's a little bit more subtle. And obviously, when we're talking about bump height, we're talking about positives. It's extruding the texture from the surface, or embossing versus debossing, basically, when you're talking about negative versus positive. So you can create different effects that way. Now, what's really fun is not when you're just creating a single texture on a surface, but it's when you start layering textures. And one of the things that KeyShot has that allows you to do this is the bump add node. So I know the material graph can get a little overwhelming, but as someone who's visual, when I get in here after a while, you really start to pick it up because you can see the individual nodes and what they're doing and control them individually. So all a bump add node is doing is it's giving me another little point where I can add another texture. And I can do this ad nauseum, whether I'm pulling in texture maps from outside of KeyShot, whether I'm using procedural textures, whether I'm combining those. All I have to do is keep adding a bump add node, and I can just stack textures to my heart's content. So you can really create some awesome custom textures. And also, when you're talking about realism, if we're not going for that studio aesthetic and we're looking for context, or putting this model in a real world scenario, we can add weathering, we can add scratches, and layer that on top of the existing texture that you would get from a manufacturer, which again adds an extreme level of realism. So I'll go in here, I go back to my color preview so I can see the actual texture a little bit better. We can see what that looks like over here. And when I hit C, now that's overlaid on top of it. It's not very intense, but I can adjust the bump height, and bam, now we're closer to something like the initial texture that I created. But just for context, you can see how you can quickly change textures and really create things that look more realistic. So that's the textures. I won't go too deep into that. And just to preface things as a whole, We have a ton of tutorials on our YouTube channel. There's a lot of great people making content outside of just myself and KeyShot. Off the top of my head, Will Gibbons is a staple. I'm sure many of you have probably seen his videos. Liam Martin, Texture Man. So if you're looking to really crank up your realism, there's so many great tutorials out there. I highly recommend you take time to kind of jump into all those. But another thing I wanted to show you, and this goes back to imperfections, surface imperfections and wear. If you notice on the screen here, I'm trying to keep it in a dark area so you get a good look at it. But we have these fingerprints that are up on the screen. I'll give it a second to res up there. So we have fingerprints that I added. Obviously it's a gloss surface, and all of us are playing any of our handheld gaming consoles or touching our phones and absolutely frustrated that you can't keep it nice and shiny. So this is one way we can add realism. That's a realistic outcome of using an object, especially if you're creating context. So I can go ahead and I can click into this material graph and we can look what I did here. Honestly, there is a lot going on compared to what needs to go on. I wanted some extreme control over how that appeared. So I have all kinds of extra stuff like color to number and color adjust. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull off this little group of nodes, and I'm going to show you how you can quickly do that. So I have fingerprints over here. This is one of the textures that is built into KeyShot. I'm going to go ahead and pull that over into our material graph. And this is an example of an image texture, right? It's not a procedural. We just have an image that we're dropping over the top of it. And then when I come over here to my actual material, I can plug that into my roughness. So if I go down to this bottom one, you'll see all the different nodes that it can attach to: opacity, bump, and roughness. I'm going to go ahead and hit roughness. And right off the bat, you can kind of see it popping up there. I've basically done nothing, and we're already seeing an effect by driving the roughness. And I'm going to hit color preview on this again so you can get a better idea of what's going on. Black background, kind of a grayish fingerprint right now, and something to be aware of. And this applies to everything. This applies to opacity, roughness, whatever you're trying to drive. KeyShot works when it's not using normal maps, when it's just using a black and white texture. Black essentially says the entire effect is turned off, while white says the effect is turned on at its fullest. And then different values between that will vary how aggressive an effect is, right? So in this case, I created all kinds of different nodes over here to get some like really extreme control over the background and over the fingerprints, but you can make it really, really simple. So right now we have that. It's about a pretty light gray with a black background. But if I come in here, just using brightness and contrast, I can adjust how intense those fingerprints are. So if I go ahead and hit C, you can see that when the brightness is really down, the fingerprint is almost non-existent. It's just faint in the background there. Versus if I crank up that brightness, you're going to have a very, very pronounced fingerprint on the screen. And again, this applies to everything from opacity to roughness. You can create opacity masks if you have a texture and you want to remove parts of that texture so it looks more organic. If you want to create dust on something that's sitting there, like a computer screen or a phone screen. If you want to create condensation on a bottle and make it look like, it's an ice cold one straight out of the refrigerator, you can do all these things using this exact same principle across the board. So, creating these wear marks and usage marks are super helpful in adding a level of realism. Again, we're talking about context rather than like a studio setting because, not all of us are creating Apple products that are perfect and unscuffed and look pristine for the camera. And again, like what Oliver was talking about, when you're talking about product photography, there's an expectation that it's pristine to the point where you're removing dust specks. And I'm no professional photographer, but I do a lot of photography. And when I've shot headshots and portraits, I'm sitting there and I'm clicking out lint balls on people's shirts, and not something you got to worry about with KeyShot. The best part is you get to add it in if you really want to add that level of realism. So very useful to add wear and tear. And then the next thing I want to talk about is depth of field. So if any of you are photographers, spent any time with a camera, are aware of lenses and aperture, you know that lower aperture lenses create a lot of depth of field, and that's where you get that fall off that really pleasing bokeh that you see in the background where if I'm taking a photo of a product, I can isolate a specific area or a detail and that's all you see, right? Well, in KeyShot we can do that. And again, we don't have to worry about lenses, we don't have to worry about cameras, but I can show you real quick about how easy it is to set up cameras. So let's grab a camera view over here. I jump over to my camera tab. Boom. All right, I created a camera. I can lock that one if I don't want it changed. Go back to my free camera. Let's grab this as a new angle. We'll save that as another camera. I can name the cameras if I want. And then whenever I'm running through, I can always just jump between the cameras real quickly. I don't need to worry about setting anything up. So again, back to depth of field, basically what I wanted to show you here is the ability to recreate that fall off that you get from a really low aperture lens just using depth of field setting here under the camera tab. And so right now, most things are in focus. I'm going to just jump over here and drop this guy really, really low. So you can see that at this point, it's over the top. I mean, we're talking like a macro shot where almost nothing is in focus, but you can see the extreme result I get from really going to a low f-stop. Now, obviously, you can dial that back and create whatever level of uh, fall off that you'd like. You can match an actual lens if you really wanted to. But the whole point I'm trying to show you is that very quickly, without having to change lenses, without having to add multiple cameras, I can simply click, add my depth of field, adjust my camera aperture. And we even have aperture shape here. So if you're using lit scenes, there's lights in the background and there's context, you can add however many camera blades you want to create the exact sort of bokeh effect you're going for. And choosing your focal point is incredibly easy. I clicked on this set focal point. I can pick anything, and then the camera automatically changes its focal point to that specific area. And with this little keep focus button selected, I zoom in, I zoom out. It'll maintain that focal point no matter where I am or how close I am to the photo. So leveraging the tools and the effects that we have inside of KeyShot that are created specifically to mimic a lens or a focal length or a camera, just make it that much easier to add a level of realism. And I mean, this is a pretty sterile scene. There's not a lot of context going on in the background, but at the same time we're already starting to look like we shot this with a camera inside of an actual studio rather than just sitting here in KeyShot. So that was like the top three things I wanted to cover, but we do have a little bit of time here, so I wanted to actually show you this bottom ground plane. So oftentimes when I'm staging a product and I want something a little more stylized like this, I like to use our ground plane texture or excuse me, our ground plane material type, which you can see is what's selected here. Now, to add a ground plane, I can either select it from that material type dropdown, or I can add it through our geometry, add a ground plane there. Now, the reason why I like doing this is because you can use a reflective surface. I mean, think about putting an object on like a pedestal or on like a metal surface in a photo studio, right? If I were to do that, which I can actually just grab, like, let's grab a metal so you can see what happens there. So now I have a really polished surface. We're getting that reflection, and theoretically I could come in here, I can add textures the same way I would anywhere else. I can adjust my roughness to create a nice kind of faded out shadow, and this looks pretty good, right? But it creates a hard horizon line. If you're at an angle, you get, the edges of your box. The only way to really create that seamless effect is to use a backdrop that's curved. We have some built-in backdrops in our models tab for like the ramp or this like half sphere that you got going on here, or half bowl. So you can create some level of gradation in your backgrounds, but then you're also locked into specific camera views. So what I like doing, especially if I'm doing a quick 360 animation, is I actually use our ground plane. And let's go ahead and click that. So now we have this ground plane. And as you can see, it just kind of becomes the background. You don't see any edges. It's full gradation. It looks like it's just kind of floating in the area. And you'll notice that there's not much going on the ground right now, right? So a little trick is if you come in here and you select your ground plane and you move your specular to white, now you start getting that reflection. So I can get a really stylized image if I'm looking for something that's like a direct 100% reflection. You know, with reflection contrast at 0, I get this kind of highlight reflection. If I crank up that contrast all the way, now I'm getting shadows and highlights. And then what I like to do once I have that set up is I just hit it with some roughness. And now we're getting a really similar effect to that metal surface I used. We're adding some weight to the product and making it feel like it's actually existing on some sort of hard surface, that this isn't just floating in space. Yet we still have this very stylized effect in an environment that, you know, clearly doesn't exist. So whenever I'm doing like a product 360, I love doing this because it's like a perfect in between of convincing you that there's enough realism, that this is a real object, and also allowing you to do something that you might not be able to do in real life. Going back to what Oliver said, where, you know, a great way to think about KeyShot is really this is a photo studio plus. I can do everything I can do inside of an actual photo studio with physical lights, with physical cameras, but I don't need to worry about any of those things. Physics don't apply inside of KeyShot, so you can get as creative as you want. And at the end of the day, you know, you can really create some cool effects that you would otherwise not be able to accomplish. And I've seen people recreate really crazy lighting setups directly in KeyShot, one for one, what a real world lighting setup would cost at a lot less money. So, you know, it's definitely a great tool to leverage. And again, we have our YouTube channel. I know Mara is going to jump in here and plug our other avenues of getting a hold of us, but you know, try to get a hold of us, comment on the videos if you guys have questions, and we'll try to create content that matches what you guys are looking for. You know, keep rendering, keep experimenting, and really see what you can do with KeyShot and see where you can push it. Mara, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I did. Thank you, first of all, so much, Kareem and Oliver, of course. We do have a couple minutes, so I wanted to address just a couple questions. I see, C. Gonzalez. You have your hand raised, but I am not seeing a way to like let you speak. But if you could put your question, if you still have it in the chat, or use the Q&A feature, we'll make sure that we answer that. Um, Okay, there's a couple in Q&A, so we'll address a couple before wrapping up. But there's one, I always move renderings, and for Oliver and Kareem, it's in the Q&A feature if you want to see them. I always move renderings into Photoshop for post-processing, but if I wanted to reduce that and leverage the tools in Image during the rendering process, what are the top 1 to 2 tricks that you suggest?
So one thing that I like about KeyShot is that it removes a lot of the basic tools in Photoshop because there's actually an image tab. I don't know, Kareem, if you
Here,
could
yeah,
share
I
your
can show that
screen
real
again.
quick. Let me pull that up real quick.
The image tab is basically a rudimentary tool that's built into KeyShot that's basically a simplified version of the things that you use in Photoshop. If you click over to photography, you see your normal controls that you're used to, like your curves, saturation, shadows, colors. And these things are actually applied after the render. So it's actually post-processing your picture directly in KeyShot. So it cuts out many of the steps that you would normally have to take from bringing renders into Photoshop to create more realism. This gives you absolute control over whatever you may want to add into a scene while maintaining kind of your setup inside KeyShot. And this is great because, especially as a product photographer, a lot of the times for the main images that you render out, you'll normally just want something that's very clean and generic looking. But for marketing content, sometimes you want it in a room with specific lighting, and all of these things can be added from the scene. Everything from like vignettes, chromatic aberration. You can even add like a full-on background into a scene that you've already created, which gives you a lot of customiz customization to things that you've put hard work into making a beautiful scene already.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that. That was actually what I was going to call out is the image tab. I think it's really useful. And not too long ago, we added the sharpen feature, which oftentimes even if I got the colors and everything where I wanted them to be, I always liked adding a little bit of sharpening afterwards in post. And now I just like give it a touch and we're good to go. I these days I'm not doing too much post processing outside of KeyShot, unless I'm trying to create a contextual background with like a different AI or something along those lines. It's pretty confined into KeyShot these days for me.
Alan had a really good question it's actually a tool that I use a lot. The question I see is for manufacturing realism. I like to see you add a larger fillet blend to the body surrounding the plus in the controller when you zoom in.
Mm,
One of the things that I always like to use, especially for models, because CAD models often are very, very sterile. They have very sharp edges which don't exist in real life. And actually, in KeyShot, there's a thing that actually makes it so that the curves are actually blended, and you can make it as extreme as you want. And the beautiful thing about that is that it doesn't actually modify the CAD that you have for manufacturing.
yeah.
It it's an optical illusion. Is there any way you could show that real quick, Cream? It's literally a checkbox that you can just check and it happens like instantaneously in front of you. And it's something that I usually, after getting all the
Yeah,
materials and everything set up, it's one of the things that I add to pretty much every single surface to make it look a lot more realistic.
let's see if it actually pops up here. So I can hit the radius and I can adjust the radius. I don't know how clear it's going to be on
It's
here.
a very subtle, it's a very
Yeah.
subtle change.
Well, let's see if I can actually make it happen. Yeah. I will say that I am retentive and I go through and I radius all my edges when I'm CAD
Yep.
modeling. But I mean, that's not a great example of it right here. But you can see that there is something actually happening. So if you want to add a little bit of a radius just to kind of hint at it, you can use this radius tool, which is underneath the scene tree all the way at the bottom, and you just kind of select whatever surface that you're trying to add it to. And I saw there was a question about pushing light into like the deep cavities of a product. One of the ways that I do that is through physical lights. I mean, you could do it with HDRIs as well, and you can adjust the radius of the light so that it's a much smaller light. And then you just use that set highlight function and pick that dark area, drop a light there, and then that'll kind of fill in those dark spaces and almost work like a fill light. I tend to like to do that with physical lights more than HDRIs, just because I can. Like literally place it in an area underneath it and then hide it and I get a specific effect. The downside with physical lights, which is like actual piece of geometry that's firing light off, is that it's a lot more intensive to calculate on your computer. So it's going to slow your scene down a little bit. Benefit is that you get a lot more natural light cast and shadow cast when you're using physical lights over HDRIs. But honestly, unless you're sitting there dissecting how much shadow spreads from the distance of the light, you probably are never going to notice it if you're looking at it.
See a few more questions in there. I don't know if you want to pick one or two to cover before we.
Yeah, I'm taking a look through these real quick. When you're talking about Lance was asking about displacement maps. So, I mean, you can turn anything that's a black to white gradient of values into a displacement map, whatever it is. You can use some of the textures that we have built into KeyShot. For instance, we have a knurling texture, which I've used to create knurling in the past. But whatever it is, whether you're generating it, I mean, you could generate it using an AI tool that's seamless, bring it into KeyShot, and then you just use your displacement to adjust how that effect is going to go. And again, well, it's the same thing as everything else. We're talking about values between black to white, and the different values are going to determine how extreme that texture is appearing once you displace it, outside of the actual adjustments to the displacement. But yeah, I mean, creating custom displacements, just think black to white and whatever texture you want. And the more straight lines there are in the pattern, or the more repeatable the pattern, the easier it is going to be to make it seamless, obviously.
Actually, even with the displacements, I've even created a full clamshell just with basic geometries, just using black to white gradients and like with the edges using extreme like blacks to really pop out kind of like a package. Like if you wanted to do a visualization of the package of a clamshell, it's a very powerful tool that essentially once you get like your colors and gradients down from black to white, you can really create very intricate things with the displacement tool, and it's very fast compared to actually having to model it.
Definitely. You got any advice on issues from CAD imports over there? I have a few.
I mean, with a lot of CAD imports, I really like the tools that KeyShot provides, especially with the bridging. I know a lot of the times they're like trying to convert CAD into polygonal models. You often get a lot of artifacts. And like the bridge into Blender that I use quite often really makes it so that I can control like how the vertices and how the lines are all applied. So I really get a clean model when bringing it into KeyShot.
Yeah, and some of the things to notice too is just, when you're CAD modeling at the origin always helps because it's a pain trying to, especially if you start getting into animation where you're trying to orbit specific points, really taking the time to do that pre-work and build your CAD intentionally is gonna save you a ton. And like I said, I'm retentive and I sit there and I actually radius out all my edges and everything because I want them to look exactly as they would once I render it. So, I mean, not everybody has time for that. Not everybody's doing that in their workflow for manufacturing, but it is helpful.
I saw there's a question about the camera locks and how setting up multiple camera views work. It's really just as simple as adding the cameras, and once you lock it, it's locked into place, and you just create as many cameras as you want. Especially from a production point of view, as the creative, as head of creative, I normally set up the cameras that I expect for all the products to be visualized on our website and also for our marketing material. And all that has to happen then is I can pass this file on to designers and they could just drop the CAD model of whatever product that they want into there and render out all those cameras. And it's already all preset and everything set up with the lighting and everything with studios, which is essentially templates for all the different lightings that you may have set up. And that makes it very easy to kind of scale your work because at the same time, if you're only one person and you have a team of 10 people, they don't have to recreate those camera angles, those lightings, and have it look consistent from one product to the next and have 10 people working on that same file to get something that looks consistent.
Definitely. And there's a question about creating multiple mood iterations of the same model without like having to copy and paste things. I mean, using studios, that's a easy way. Using model sets, that's another easy way. We have two different tools for kind of creating. We have the old school multi-material, which is how I always used to create colorways. And then we added the colorways feature. So now you can actually, create colorways and physically see them. So there's a few different ways that you can build out moods and iterations. When we're talking about model sets, it makes it really nice if you have product variations too. Like if your product is modular and there's different configurations, you just create a model set and you might have a different iteration with a different colorway, right? And that's one way to approach that. Yeah, and Diego, just real quick, yeah, I've worked with the 3D Ply stuff a lot, and it definitely is intensive, especially when you have tons of flyaways. If it's a really big object, it's going to slow things down if you don't have a super powerful computer. Honestly, the best thing I can say is don't use the flyaways and that geometry until the very end when you're you've already set up your scene, you kind of have everything dialed in, and then turn it on at the end there, and then that's where you kind of start fine tuning just so you can move a little bit faster.
And a lot of times, especially for heavier scenes too, I often would just work in performance mode. And then when you're rendering, you can actually tell it to use the GPU mode and to get the maximum quality. So that way you can still navigate without your computer basically dying from trying to rotate the camera. But that makes it so that you can still get a high quality final product, but it doesn't affect your workflow and slow you down.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add to that too is if you are working like that and you don't want to, obviously it's going to take a lot of energy and time to render something that intense if you're doing the full image. But if you use region render and you just pick a spot and just render that region, you can stay in performance mode. You can render in CPU or GPU, get a little snapshot of what the final product is going to be just on that corner, and then that just gives you a way of working around, the wait times of having to render. Even though these days I'm pretty much only on GPU.
Yeah.
And even with I mean, I have a 3080 on this, and there's a 4080 or a 4090 in the one that Oliver is using right now. And even with those, we're having insanely fast render times. So these days, especially a region renderer, you're going to be able to get something pretty quick.
Okay, I think we're just about at time for questions because I want to make sure that we announce who's the winner of our KeyShot Studio license. So again, thank you so much, Oliver and Kareem. Great, great, great stuff. To the questions we didn't get to, I will mention in just a second how you can get those questions answered a couple other ways. But I basically took the list of everyone who was in attendance live today, ran it through a randomizer, and our winner is Alan Wilson. So I will reach out to you via email. We have your email at registration. We'll make sure that you get that code and that you get set up and get everything that you need. But thank you all so much for being here today. I did just want to call out before we wrap. There we go. So, if you didn't get a question answered today, because thank you, we had a ton of them, we do have our KeyShot Luminaries community. This is not just for KeyShot users. You can hop in there and talk with other designers. And just chat about industry things. There's a lot of you I saw in there that are already in this community, but it's a great way to connect with your peers, connect with us here at KeyShot. I know Oliver's in there when he has time, Kareem is in there when he has time. Give us feedback. We look at it. Our product team is in there every single day answering questions, gathering your feedback, asking you questions. And just getting recognized for your work as well. So it's also a place you can go and earn points for engaging, and you have the opportunity to earn enough points to redeem things like discounts on a KeyShot license, or if you didn't win it today, you can redeem a license that way too. But we would love to see you there. Just a continuation of what we did here today. We've introduced some weekly onboarding webinars with our trainers. So we would love to see you over there. But thank you so, so, so much to IDSA. It's an amazing partnership that we have with them. It's always great to see them at IDC, and then we've been kind of getting involved on some of the more regional levels too. So we hope to continue this partnership for a long time. Thank you, Moss at IDSA, Dante, everybody there. And again, Oliver and Kareem, thank you for everything. And thank you to all of you for being here today. We really appreciate it. So hope to see you soon at an upcoming webinar or just around. And thank you for joining us today. We're going to close out the webinar.